It's Easter weekend, which means an expanded football schedule for our panel of betting experts to dig into. Sam Scott and Danny Alley have been scrambling for picks from Spain, Italy, and multiple tiers of England this weekend, while I try to include as many egg-related puns in my questions as possible. All that and more on today's show. Hello, welcome to the Football Betting Pod powered by Betting Expert. I'm your host, Daniel Jenkins, joined as ever by Betting Expert's football editor, Sam Ingram. How are you doing, Sam?
I'm good, Dan. How are you?
I'm great. We're recording on a Wednesday, which is quite unusual for a weekend pod, but Easter schedule and all that. So, Champions League last night. Enjoy PSG Villa?
Very enjoyable. Very, very good game. Just looking forward to tonight, probably even more so.
Yeah. Another person looking forward to tonight's football, Daniel Fiscala. Which game are you going to be watching?
Well, I was sure because I'm quite fancy the Inter one, but we'll see. I'll make up my mind at the end.
Yeah, multiple screens.
Yes.
Also joining us again, Scott Thornton. How you doing, man?
Very good, very good. Can't wait as well.
Good stuff. Right, let's jump straight into the tips. Second pod this week, so let's just get straight into it. Sam, do you want to kick us off with your first pick from League One?
Yes, this is actually a bet for Easter Monday, so there is a round of games before this one, so probably should have left this one to the end. But Stockport minus 0.25 Asian handicap versus Huddersfield. That's at 1.87. So when you're having a bet in general on the weekend, I suppose what you want to be doing is ideally to be backing a team that's in good form, in a good rhythm, one that knows how to win games at the minute at this stage of the season, and ideally a team that's playing at home. And even better than that, a team that performs well at that venue in front of home support. And that's exactly what we've got with Stockport County right now at Edgeley Park. They've won 5 of their last 6, 12 wins in 17. And the second part of an ideal weekend bet, you'd probably have a struggling team in the away dressing room, out of form. Hopes and motivation fade in terms of an eventual league finish and what that means for their playoff aspirations. And even better than that, maybe one that sacked their manager not too long ago, replaced him with someone from the academy, and one that has since overseen 4 losses in his first 6 games. And that is exactly what we've got in Huddersfield. 2 big teams for the level earlier on in the season. This is a head-to-head that I'd have left alone completely. But now, considering the lay of the land and the fact that we can get the home side with the draw protection to some degree on our side with a minus 0.25 Asian handicap, half stake returns if it's a draw, it becomes a must bet for me on the weekend on Monday. And like I mentioned, there is a full EFL schedule on Friday, so both clubs will have their attentions elsewhere before coming into this game. And for Stockport, in terms of motivation, what they're focusing on in the run-in at the business stages end of the season, they're still chasing down Wrexham in the automatic promotion spot. They made 2 points on Wrexham last weekend. They drew 0-0 to Wigan. Wrexham aren't in great form like they have been at previous stages of the season. So Stockport, I imagine Dave Challoner's side, they might be getting a little bit of a whiff of blood, and I expect them to keep pushing and pushing until they can either clinch automatics or it's just out of reach.
Sam, I do want to talk a little bit about the Easter schedule, but maybe I'll leave that for your second bet, because for this one, I want to speak a little bit about like head-to-heads and how much you look into previous records between 2 clubs for your picks. Obviously, if it's Premier League game or a Championship game between 2 sides that are playing each other season in, season out quite regularly, you can learn a little bit more. But in the case of Huddersfield and Stockport, obviously they played each other back in the reverse leg back in December on Boxing Day, wasn't it? But since that was the first game they played, they've been in the same league together since 2010. How much do you look into the fact that Stockport, okay, they haven't played too often, but Stockport haven't beaten Huddersfield in a league match since 2004, 2003-4 season. When you look at these clubs, obviously they aren't playing each other as often, but do you read anything into that? Do you think that there's a sort of, it's sort of baked into the club, even if probably nobody at Stockport or Huddersfield now were there back then?
I don't think it's that important. maybe when you have teams like maybe up in Scotland when they play each other, they play each other like 4 times a year, and in the cup as well. That's a little bit different because you really get to know certain styles the other styles, certain clubs versus other clubs, and managers versus managers, and you can really dig into the data because there's enough of a sample size. But when you've got, I think they've probably played each other, Huddersfield and Stockport, maybe 5-6 times going back to the 2004 game you mentioned. So I really don't think it really factors into my decision making, unless what I do look for is if there's a quick turnaround in head to heads, like if they play in maybe January and for some reason they're playing again in February, maybe that will come into my thinking. Huddersfield did win 1-0 in December, but they scored in the first minute, and then it was pretty much all Stockport looking for an equaliser in that game. So yeah, not too much, Dan, but this is a bet. I've got 2 bets this week focusing on motivation at both ends of the table. And last weekend, Huddersfield lost 3-0 to Burton Albion, and that meant Burton Albion were out of the relegation zone. And although Huddersfield are in 9th, only 5 points from Reading, it really does feel like a side rapidly hurtling away from playoff contention. After the Burton game, the Huddersfield players went over to the away end and they were chanting, "You're not fit to wear the shirt," etc. So that gives you maybe the kind of vibe around the club at the minute. And we've seen questionable decision making from those higher up at the club, and I'm not sure if I'd have got rid of Michael Duff personally at this stage of the season with playoff football in view. Maybe that was a move you could make if they had a replacement lined up, like someone to really come in and kick this group of players on in the final 10 games or so. But if we think about it, at this stage of the season, getting rid of a manager like Michael Duff, who's quite a big manager for the level, and replacing him with someone working in the academy at the football club, what kind of message does that send to a group of pros? What are they getting from that? Like sometimes, it works promoting from within on an interim basis, someone who knows the club, loves the club, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think here it's looking like it's really not working. Huddersfield season's seemingly starting to tail off with much more questions and answers in that part of Yorkshire. And I just think it's probably the time to start back in Stockport because they're playing really well. They're getting results over the line. Went 1-0 down to Rotherham on the weekend, ended up winning 3-1, coming back into the game, obviously still fighting for points. And yeah, like I mentioned, Dave Challoner and Stockport, they've got previous in getting promoted and going on pretty decent runs nearer the back end of the season. So I think they're going to keep going and going. And it's probably a really good time to play Huddersfield and a really bad time to play Stockport. So I love the fact we can get minus 0.25 with a draw on side, and I'll be taking that for a unit and a half.
Oh, yeah. Always a shock when you go 1 on a unit. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Huddersfield lost 4 in a row, haven't scored in any of them. Huddersfield currently in 9th, Stockport in 4th, which, according to Betsy, is exactly where they will finish if the table projections are anything to be believed. Stockport obviously going for those playoff spots. Yeah, be really interesting. Lots to fight for in this game. Sam's first bet is Stockport minus 0.25 Asian handicap versus Huddersfield. That's a 1.87 with 1.5 units on it. Scott, over to you for the first of your picks from the Premier League, Aston Villa versus Newcastle.
Yeah, one of the better games in the Premier League this weekend. Newcastle obviously in action tonight, Crystal Palace, so big game as well. But this is sort of a fight for the Champions League places, the way I look at it at the moment. Villa, obviously a tremendous effort against PSG. Emery saying they deserve to play Champions League football, and it's difficult to argue with that, to be honest, with the performance, but you need to go out and earn it. So this game is massive. They got home advantage. I believe they lost the reverse fixture 3-0, so obviously improvement needed. Newcastle gone from strength to strength since winning the EFL Cup. No sign of a hangover. Will there be a hangover from Villa after, a high at Villa Park with, the crowd were just really behind the team? Didn't quite get over the line, but a very, very good performance nonetheless. But I've sided with under 32.5 throws and over 9.5 shots for Newcastle. I do think Villa will give us a very good go, but their exertions midweek in the Champions League will have an impact. They're conceding plenty of shots in their Premier League home games, Villa, at the moment. So the last 8 have seen their opponents average 12.25. It's worth noting that average is brought down drastically by the fact that Ipswich and Leicester, the only two who have failed to reach the 12-shot mark, had 4 each. So, two sides that are destined for the drop. I believe Leicester can go down this weekend if they don't get a result against Liverpool. It's close anyway. So Villa conceding plenty of shots. Newcastle, they've had 13 or more shots in their 3 league games since winning silverware. So again, no signs of a hangover. Obviously, that's before the Palace clash tonight. So keep an eye on that one if for the shot count. But we can go off what we've seen so far. Newcastle will give it a very good go against Villa, and they haven't really had to deal with fixture congestion this season. So okay, they're in action midweek, but they're more than capable of handling that. Newcastle had 22 shots in the reverse fixture and 14 the last time they came to Villa Park. So again, nothing to be worried about. They're over 9.5, looking very, very doable. I've spoken about it before. Villa matches see the fewest throw-ins in the Premier League this season with 25.94 on average. There were 32 or less in 14 of Villa's 16 Premier League home matches and just 18 in the reverse fixture at St James's Park. So again, nothing to worry about in terms of the averages or the recent head-to-heads. The last meeting at this ground, 30 throw-ins. So a little bit closer, but still below the 32.5. So yeah, happy with both of those shots and throw-ins angles.
Yeah, looks good. Certainly a big game in the Premier League for those European spots, isn't it? Betsy projecting 1.5 goals for Aston Villa, 1.36 for Newcastle, goal difference of 0.14, goal total of 2.85. And looking at the table projections, at the moment, Betsy's currently projecting Newcastle to finish in third on 66.9 points. Aston Villa way down in seventh, but only on 62.3. So one result either way could make a big difference in those races in the race for the top 5 spots in Champions League qualification. Scott, is there any chance that Villa respond from this midweek defeat to PSG? Because it's quite rare for a team to go out of the Champions League in such a sort of positive way. They won on the night. They've won 9 of their last 10 matches in all competitions, Villa, and give a fantastic account of themselves against PSG. Is there a chance that maybe they just think, we can play this way against one of, if not the best team in Europe? We should fancy our chances against Newcastle on the weekend.
You'd like to think so, because they were so fantastic in that game. I still don't worry too much about either of the props angles from the betting standpoint, but I would like to think the Villa are going to give it a very good go. The worry for me would be that we've spoken about it again a few times. Their record after European games is generally so poor. I think they won their first game after a European match in about 7 against Southampton, maybe 8. So they've done it twice this season. I believe they beat Wolves and Southampton, so 2 relegation battlers. Newcastle, obviously, nowhere near that category, Champions League chasers. So that is the worry. Villa have really shown frailty after midweek Champions League fixtures, and a lot of those results were positive. They beat Bayern Munich 1-0 midweek and then failed to win in the Premier League at the weekend. So a little bit of a worry from that standpoint. But in terms of the props angles, little changes for me, to be honest. I think Newcastle are capable of hitting that over 9.5 shot line. Villa are not going to abandon their principles and start hoofing the ball into the channels and force a lot of throw-ins. It should be a decent game of football. Hopefully Villa can show their best because, as I say, it's difficult to argue with Emery. They probably do deserve to play Champions League football next season, making that top 8 and then giving a real good go of it against PSG, who are currently Betsy's favourites to lift the trophy. So hopefully they can actually earn that, but work to be done.
Yeah, huge 8 or so days for Aston Villa. They play Newcastle on the Saturday, Manchester City away in midweek, and then it's that FA Cup semi-final against Crystal Palace the weekend after. So, if they play like they did against PSG, then they've got a good chance of getting at least a couple of wins from those 3 matches. Scott Thornton's first pick of the podcast is under 32.5 throws and over 9.5 shots for Newcastle in Aston Villa versus Newcastle. That's a 1.86 with a full unit on that. Daniele, over to you with the first of your 2 picks.
So this is Napoli traveling to bottom of the table Monza, and I'm gonna go with the underdogs in this case. Monza Asian handicap plus 175 for the host, which pays 170 on Bet365, so you can put a full unit on that. Now, logic will say this is a game that Napoli wins easily. They win, they get the 3 points, and they put a lot of pressure on Inter because they play 24 hours before them. And I do accept that. I think the outcome of the game is very, very likely to be Napoli to get the 3 points. However, the manner in which they will get the 3 points, it's what encourages me to favor Monza. Napoli have I've been stuttering recently. Only they haven't won away in the last 5 games, and they weren't just games against top sides. They visited Venezia and did 0-0. Earlier in the season, they went to Empoli, another team in the bottom three, and they only won 1-0. And on the other hand, you got Monza, who are basically desperate. This is almost last chance saloon, and they are projected to collect 4 more points between now and the end of the season. Where are these 4 more points going to come? They go Juventus away, they go Atalanta home, they go Milan away, and then a couple of winnable games at home. I'm not suggesting by any stretch of imagination that Monza here gets a point, but do look at the way they approached teams, top teams, especially at home. They've never been beaten by more than a goal margin when they played at home against top sides. Recently traveled to Milan to the San Siro and lost only 3-2. Have they underachieved? Well, the expected points table suggests they should have 1135 points more. Couple that with the fact that Napoli have slightly overachieved and they should have 9 points less. Okay, this is not an exact science, and you can understand why. This is a very low projected goal tally, by the way, 228. Napoli only got the seventh attack in terms of expected goals away from home. So this could be easily a 1-0 win for Napoli, 2-0 win, and again, being a plus 175 Asian handicap, that means he will only lose alpha stake. I think it's worth going for it.
Yeah, it looks good. It's a good way to sort of get Napoli on side without really getting Napoli on side, right?
Yes.
Are you expecting this recent run for Napoli to kind of continue throughout the rest of the season, Daniele? Because they have dipped quite a bit since start of February, wasn't it? Since the January window, scoring far fewer goals. Is this just the Napoli we're going to see for the rest of the season?
I think this week's success against Empoli 3-0 flattened them. Empoli were much better value than what the scoreline reflects. But Napoli didn't have the deep in form in the second halves as they recently did in other games. It is true, though, there have been a few injuries that the fitness level is not quite as expected, considering they haven't played in Europe and they've been knocked out by the Coppa Italia very, very early. But this is it for Napoli. The next 6 fixtures are extremely winnable. Torino home, Lecce away, Genoa home, Parma away, Cagliari at home. Some of these teams will already be saved by the time they face Napoli. So playing against teams have got nothing to play for, whereas Inter have got a much more demanding schedule starting from this weekend with a trip to Bologna. It's a golden opportunity for Napoli to win the Scudetto. Bezzi still projects them to finish second, 3 points behind Inter, but they got a 22% chances of winning the league, which is probably the highest you will find in any of the top 5 league in Europe. So again, it is worth considering. But yeah, coming back to your question, I think I'm not gonna say it is in Napoli's hands because it's still in Inter's hands, and it's better to be, the fox rather than the hunter, or the one everywhere in life and in football. I think it's better to be you have your destiny in your hands. But yeah, Napoli, it's gonna be I think they're gonna win it. Very interesting for Napoli. They got a few injuries, as I mentioned. They will be without Buongiorno. They will be without Juan Jesus. Rafa Marin was only featured for 23 minutes in Serie A this season. He's gonna start this game, and I think that's probably one of the main problems this year with Conte. He hasn't rotated the players as much. He wanted so desperately Billy Gilmour, didn't play him enough, and he's always sticking to the same 11. So sometimes he might lack a plan B. Having said that, Asian handicap 1.75 for Monza. I think Napoli wins this 1-0. Not sure about the 2-1 scoreline. It's a good way to get both sides on your side, if you like.
Yeah. That 3-0 win over Empoli last week was just the fourth time this season Napoli have won a match by more than 2 goals. It doesn't seem that sort of sustainable if you want to go and win league titles. Daniele's first bet of the show is Monza plus 1.75 against Napoli. That's a 1.70 with a full unit on that. Sam, back over to you with another match from the English lower leagues.
Yes, I'm going to Bromley v Morecambe. Over 2.5 goals at 1.92. So to set the scene, I'll get the league table up. Morecambe are rock bottom, right down there in League 2. If Accrington, who are outside of the relegation spots, if they win away in Salford, and Tranmere beat Doncaster on the weekend, and Morecambe also lose to Bromley, then Morecambe are mathematically relegated with 3 games left to play. Morecambe travel to Bromley, a team promoted from the National League last season via Wembley. They've done brilliantly this season. They're in 14th, around mid-table, plenty of points, 10 points off playoffs as it stands, probably a gap that won't be closed now. They've got Michael Cheek up top, Bromley striker. He's the league's top goal scorer on 21, 4 ahead of second, so he's still got a little bit to play for. They've done really well this season overall. They were favourites for the drop along with Morecambe, but a National League side hasn't been promoted and instantly come back down to the National League at the first time of asking for a long, long time. Andy Woodman, Bromley manager, he'll have his team up for this at Hayes Lane, despite motivation not being as strong to win it as it is in the away dressing room. Bromley, they've returned 28 points at home this season, which is the 20th best record in their league, and on the road they've returned the same amount of points, but that is actually the 9th best away form in the division. So that's something which has pushed them right up into the realms of being safe at this stage of the season. And a place actually a month or so ago where they were looking like contenders for playoffs after a very strong February. I'm expecting there to be maybe a little bit of a party atmosphere at Hayes Lane for the rest of the season. And I'm hopeful that shows on the weekend, shows on the players, and they go out there, have a bit of fun, express themselves, and look to create as many opportunities as possible. And after Bromley's head-turning run in February, they lost 2-1 to Tranmere, who were also fighting for their lives. And since then, they've won just once in 7 after winning 5 of the 7 games before that run. And more importantly here for me, since that Tranmere defeat, Bromley have landed over 2.5 goals in 6 of 7 of their most recent games, with the 1-1 with Newport in that run, the one unders outlier, which saw Bromley have 4 big chances but failed to convert more than once. So it seems like after that really good run, started to drop points, and then they've probably thought, look, playoffs are out of reach. Let's just go out and attack these games, have a bit of fun. And the goals have come. So considering Bromley's recent form, considering Morecambe desperately need a win, desperately need to score goals, I'm going for over 2.5 goals at 1.92, which I thought was a pretty good way in.
Yeah, it looks a good price, Sam. I mean, based on what you've been saying, I'm honestly quite surprised you haven't gone for the home win and maybe thrown in some goals angles in there. What was the thinking behind not siding with the hosts here? Because looking at the records of the two teams, like a Morecambe's away form, I thought maybe an easier way in would be just to back the hosts. Why have you gone for goals?
Yeah, Bromley should be beating Morecambe, but when you're a team, a set of players that need to win to stay in the Football League, like, if you lose the game, the club is relegated to the National League. It makes it a little bit difficult to side against that kind of spirit and determination, desire, all the kind of intangibles that is really difficult to factor into the price. So I thought it might be best just to maybe lean towards goals. And for Morecambe, like I said, lose the game out of the Football League, win the game. Still a very tall ask for the football club to stay in the division after struggling for so long this season. They also lost to their relegation-threatened rival in Carlisle United last week at home, which was a brutal blow to their survival bids. Carlisle play Port Vale on Friday, who are top of League Two. So if Morecambe can get a win here, Carlisle lose at against Port Vale, then who knows? Derek Adams, the Morecambe manager, he's been around the block, ex-Plymouth Argyle as well, and there's no chance he'll have given up on this, which is reflected by some of his comments this week. He said, "We do have belief because we have matched most teams in the league all season, and we need that belief next week. We still have to win 3 games to have any opportunity of staying up." So Morecambe simply have to win. Nothing else will do. Adams is at his fair few big moments in relegation dogfight, so this is very much still on for him, regardless of how perilous or how hopeless it looks on paper. But they are in this position because they're not quite good enough for the level. They don't score enough goals. They don't do what's required to turn performances into points. So the concern here is obviously that happens again and Bromley run out 1-0 winners, 2-0 winners, which would suit what you were saying, Dan. But I would lean toward maybe that not happening if we see that, determined desire to fend off relegation. We saw it last night with Aston Villa. Scott spoken about it already, although clearly quite a different set of circumstances. But when that need and that hunger to win is there and you keep knocking on the door, you can maybe beat the best team in world football, and Morecambe don't have that in front of them. They have a Bromley side that has been a breath of fresh air for the level, but one that can certainly be beat in League Two.
That's a very good and thorough answer. Thank you, Sam. I do just very quickly want to ask you about sort of how you think about the fixtures over a weekend like Easter, because obviously we've got full set of fixtures on the Friday and on the Monday. I know you don't really have a problem betting quite far in advance. You usually like to get the lines when they open and look for angles before the market shifts. But how does teams playing two matches in such a short span of time, everyone playing two matches in such a short piece of time, how does that affect your thinking? Because you've done one bet on the Friday match, one bet on a Monday match.
Yeah, well, luckily everyone's in the same position, aren't they? Like you said, they've got to play Friday and Monday, so it doesn't really make too much of a difference. But this Easter weekend clearly comes at the same time every year, and it always comes at a time where there are teams desperately scrapping to stay in the league, teams fighting for relegations, teams going for automatics in the title. So I always just have a look at both sets of schedules and just pick games where there are gaps in motivation, where some teams are clearly not too motivated, others are very motivated, and see if there's an angle in that. It's not always going to be team A who needs something to win, or team B who doesn't need something to lose the game. It can be goals like this one here, or it can be a handicap or second half goals when, teams need something, when teams need a result. That usually comes out in the data and comes out in terms of scores and outcomes. So that's usually how I play it. And like I said, it's just a perfect weekend for me. Love EFL football, and there's so much on the line. What are we, 4 games to go, 5 games to go? So probably one of my favorite weekends of the year.
Yeah, all to play for. Sam's second bet of the pod is over 2.5 goals in Bromley versus Morecambe. It's a 1.92. It's gone for 1 full unit on that. Scott, back over to you for the second of your picks from the Premier League this weekend.
So this time it's the Monday night game. It isn't a Monday night, even though it's the Easter Monday. Tottenham versus Nottingham Forest. Both teams to score and over 17.5 tackles for Nottingham Forest. Forest have been in the top 4 for what feels like all season, but they've been third since match day 16. I think just before that they were outside. Now it's the top 5 for Champions League football, which ultimately is the aim for Forest. Rich history in the Champions League. A return to the competition would be something to celebrate really for English football, but they're at very real risk of dropping out. Now, obviously, they were beaten by Everton last week, 94th minute from Decore. 2-point cushion now, I believe, from 6th place. It's one of those that is going to move a lot over the next few weeks. To say Newcastle are in action tonight. Villa chasing. Nottingham Forest need to go to Tottenham and get a result. They do have the advantage that Tottenham are going to be in a make or break Europa League clash on Thursday night, so there's something to play to. But they'll have to be aggressive. They'll have to be positive. Tottenham are certainly going to be positive, regardless of how tired whoever plays. Ange Postecoglou has already shown that he's going to play one way, regardless of the personnel or whatever he thinks the toll of midweek's fixture is going to be. So goals seemed like a no-brainer, and so do opposition tackles, to be honest, and the numbers will make it clear why. Tottenham matches, it won't be a surprise to learn that they see the most goals in the Premier League with 3.41 on average. Both teams have scored in 8 of their last 10 home matches with 3.8 on average. So both teams' score looks very, very doable here. Forest's recent away games, they're also seeing plenty of goals, 3.9 on average in their last 10. Both teams have scored in the last 4. 3-1 when they split last time they played Spurs at this ground. So all things point to goals. It's a really massive game for Forest, and Tottenham are home. They're not exactly going to be tepid in their approach. Postecoglou knows exactly what he wants from his team. Okay, it isn't working at the moment. They're 15th in the Premier League, but Tottenham. We know exactly what we're going to get from them. They're going to try to play football what the manager sees as the right way. It's just having consequences in terms of scoring and conceding a lot of goals. Because of this single-minded approach, forced the most tackles in the Premier League with an average of 22.62 for their opponents. The overall league average is around 17.89 last I checked. Forest themselves average just above that with 18.22, which all quite clearly above the 17.5 line. that I've asked for here. But the real height comes from Spurs' recent home matches. 7 of their last 8 home games have seen their opponents hit the 18 tackle mark. City were the only side that didn't, and they had 17 tackles. Over that period, their opponents are having over 25 tackles per game. So way, way, way above what we're asking for this bet to land. Forest also had 21 in the reverse fixture against Tottenham and 21 in the last away game they played, which was against Aston Villa, and Villa don't force anywhere near as many tackles as Tottenham. So because of how important it is for Forest, Tottenham, we know what we're going to get. Goals, 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 and over 17.5 tackles for the away side.
Yeah, Tottenham matches usually do mean goals, goals, goals. Betsy is projecting 3.07 total goals, 1.71 for the hosts, and 1.36 for Nottingham Forest. Just want to speak about Tottenham a bit more specifically, Scott, and how this affects your bet. Obviously, we're doing this pod on the Wednesday. Ideally, we would be doing it on the Friday after we know the result of Tottenham's match in the Europa League on Thursday. Will, looking at the way Tottenham are at the moment, it is kind of down to that Europa League, isn't it? So that's their last chance. We've spoken about it off air. That's probably the only reason Ange Postecoglou is still in the job, is that the fact that they're still in the Europa League. If they lose in the Europa League on Thursday and they get dumped out, how do you think that could affect this bet? Do you think that would suck all motivation out of Tottenham? Could Postecoglou go straight away after it? In which case, how's that going to affect things? Spurs have very little to fight for in the Premier League right now. So, yeah, just how does the timing of this bet and the Europa League match affect?
The Europa League match definitely affects things in the sense where, as you say, Postecoglou is effectively out of a job if they were to lose to Eintracht Frankfurt. I don't think they'll sack him before the Monday Night Football. I think he'll probably see up the season anyway. I'd be open to opinions on that one. If they did sack him, you could argue that there'd be sort of a bit of a lift for Tottenham. It's a home game against a team that are ranked where Tottenham probably should be in the Premier League, at least where they're aiming to be. And I just don't see them offering nothing going forward because it's a home game and because they've still got talent on the pitch, Tottenham. They're still used to playing attacking football. Tottenham, even through their unsuccessful patches, do play an entertaining brand of football. At least they strive to play an entertaining brand of football, barring maybe the Jose Mourinho and Conte eras. But Tottenham are a club associated with a certain brand of football. I just think we'll see them try to put their best foot forward, even if it is on the back of a massive disappointment in a Europa League exit, which, obviously after failing to win the home leg, it's a very real possibility that they do go out against Eintracht.
Yeah, I think Frankfurt have a really good chance. Ryan Mason is still on the coaching staff, and after his interim stint in 2021 and a second in an interim stint in 2023, he's still there doing that 2-year cycle of failed managerial appointments at Tottenham. So
you just keep him in post, wouldn't you? And there's not much point getting rid of him, you would think.
I wouldn't sack him. There's not really any, he's probably gonna have to go in the summer, but you'd like to think they do their due diligence and bring in somebody that can sort of take on the style that they've aimed for. Just maybe it hasn't worked, but Postecoglou arrived with a remit to change Tottenham from this negative side that they become under sort of managers like Conte, Mourinho, to what they used to be. And okay, it hasn't worked this season, but last season was pretty good. And the best thing to do would be to take stock in the summer. They can't be pulling triggers now. But then it's Tottenham, so Dan's smiling as we're talking about Tottenham. But it's Tottenham, so who knows? But I don't think he'll have. Of course, he'll have an impact on the game, but in terms of the bet, I think both teams' to score is very doable anyway. And it's not like Tottenham's players are going to completely change the way they approach a game in 2 days, probably half a day on the training pitch between the Europa League game and the Monday Night Football.
Yeah, we'll see which seat Ryan Mason operates in the dugout on Monday night. Scott's second bet is both teams to score and over 17.5 tackles for Forest when Forest travel to Tottenham on Monday night. That's a 2.10 with a full unit on that. Daniele, over to you for your second tip, looking at a potential European hangover.
Sunday, and that's Real Madrid hosting Atletico Bilbao. Both teams playing in Europe, but of course, Atletico Bilbao huge favorites to beat Rangers. Not as much Real Madrid against Arsenal, although they are favorites, but not favorites to qualify. And I'm gonna side with the visitors here, with Atletico Bilbao, with Valverde's team plus 0.75 on the Asian handicap at odds on 201 with Bet365. Seems good, but this is mainly based on one big absentee, which is Kylian Mbappe. Real Madrid are only going to be without the Frenchman for just one game, which seems lucky and fortunate enough after his sending off against Alaves. But how do you solve the problem if you are without the man who's taken more shots on target in La Liga, your top goal scorer, your main source of goals, really? And I know Mbappe perhaps hasn't had the best of the seasons, but is anyone who can replace him at Real Madrid? Probably the option would be to move Hendrik more in a central position or perhaps trying to play with a false nine. It just doesn't seem an ideal preparation considering they're still in the La Liga title challenge, and this is a crucial week after Arsenal, of course. There is Atletico Bilbao, and then there is the Copa del Rey final, so everything could unravel for Carlo Ancelotti. Now, with Mbappe, according to Betsy, our in-house projection tools, Real Madrid would earn 0.9 points fewer this season, which is a notable difference for a single player. We have run different simulations during the month, how Liverpool would do without Trent, for example, or how Liverpool would do without Salah, and this is actually one of the highest value. You'd say, yeah, it's just a point, but in a tight title race, a point really could be the difference. And in terms of goal difference, they would be 0.14 goals worse without him. Comes into the foe Athletic Bilbao, a team that has only lost 3 away games this season, all of them by 1 goal margin, at Barcelona, at Atletico Madrid, and at Girona, and they got the best away defense in La Liga with 25 goals conceded, average 0.8 per match. You can tackle in both angles. I think they will score. Both team to score, yes, has been successful in 10 of the last 12 games at the Bernabeu, or with this Asian handicap 0.75 for Athletic Bilbao, 16 out of 21 away games, if you take into account all competition, this bet would have won.
Yeah, that I was going to bring up that Bilbao away record. It's very impressive, isn't it? One of the most, I think it's one of the best in Spain. Um, Speaking about Real Madrid more specifically, Daniel, they did have a very tough week. Obviously, losing to Valencia, as you said, the La Liga feels like it's too far. Champions League feels like it's too far, even if they're still, still in both, involved in both. There's still potential for a turnaround in both, and Madrid will still play Barcelona in the La Liga, so it's still on the line. Are we being a bit too quick to nail the coffin into this Madrid season? Looking at the records, they've still won 9 of their last 13 matches in all competitions. All right, they had a pretty terrible week. That draw against Sociedad, 4-4 draw against Sociedad in the Copa del Rey, and then losses to Valencia and Arsenal. Are we a bit too quick to write them off? Is there a chance they can just Madrid their way out of this?
They got a 15% chance of winning the title according to Betsy, which is considerably higher if you compare them to Napoli chances in Italy, because there's the head-to-head against Barcelona. But they've been second best this season against Barcelona in their head-to-head, and I think they've been second best even against Atletico Madrid in those Champions League ties. They have spent a lot of energies in those Champions League ties against Atletico Madrid, a lot of mental energy. I think they suffer from it. But this is a far from perfect Real Madrid, and he was a far from perfect Real Madrid even last season when they conceded a record number of goals in the Champions League, and they are very close to match the tally. Of course, if they don't want to go through, they won't. But the goals per game ratio has been very high. Is a Real Madrid that in their day and the moments they can score, but look at how many both team to score results they have achieved, and I think that really when the alarm should ring. Going back to Mbappe and going back to Atletico Bilbao in the reverse fixtures, by the way, Real Madrid lost 2-1. Mbappe had 1.17 expected goals in that game. He missed the penalty, okay, but he was the second highest tally this season for him in any away La Liga game and was way above of anyone else playing for Real Madrid. So obviously Atletico Bilbao can shut them down, know how to shut them down. And yeah, I think that's why the main reason why I'm siding for them.
Betsy projections for this game: 1.83 projected goals for Real Madrid, 0.93 for Bilbao, goal total of 2.76, difference is 0.89. So yeah, not Betsy obviously isn't factoring in everything, including like midweek fixtures and just going on the underlying data. So be interesting to see how Daniele's second tip turns out, which is Atletico Bilbao at plus 0.75 Asian handicap versus Real Madrid. That's a 2.01 with a full unit on there. There's no time for a pod treble this week, but we will be doing another top of the props. Scott and Sam, if I'm not mistaken, still sticking with that name.
Yeah, we're going to get that one done early. 1.6 down in the first week. I think we were quite unlucky with the Heisen shot, to be honest. So he had a bit of an opportunity and the ball just went by him. But some decent fixtures to get into this weekend, so we'll get one of those out.
Yeah, that should be going out on Thursday on our brand new YouTube channel at the Football Betting Podcast on YouTube. There'll be a link in the bio on whichever platform you are listening to this. Let's do a quick recap of the tips, please, starting with you, Sam.
Stockport, minus 0.25 Asian handicap against Huddersfield. That's on Monday. That's at 1.87 for 1.5 units. And also Bromley versus Morecambe on Friday. Over 2.5 goes at 1.92 for a unit.
And Scott?
Aston Villa versus Newcastle, under 32.5 throws and over 9.5 shots for Newcastle at 1.86. And then Tottenham versus Nottingham Forest, both teams to score and over 17.5 tackles for Forest at 2.1. A unit on both of those bets.
And Daniele?
Monza Asian handicap plus 175 against Napoli at 170, and Atletico Bilbao Asian handicap plus 0.75 against Real Madrid at 201, both 1 units.
If you are going to be using any of the bets from today's show, then please gamble responsibly, only betting what you can afford to lose. Thank you as ever to Sam Ingram.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott Thornton.
Thank you.
And thank you, Daniele Fiscalo.
Thank you.
Thanks from me. We'll be back next week.